This morning, Netflix is under growing fire after its release of the award-winning French film, Cuties. Fallout surrounding the movie began even before its Netflix debut. Last month, the streaming giant apologized and pulled this promotional poster for Cuties after it sparked outrage on social media. Netflix says its own choice of artwork was inappropriate. After its official U.S. premiere on the streaming service last week, the film is facing growing backlash. Some people are even canceling their subscriptions, and the hashtag #CancelNetflix is trending. The Parents Television Council is urging Netflix to remove the film, rated for mature audiences, saying young actresses were sexualized in the making of this movie. In addition to being coached and trained in highly sexualized dance routines, these girls use foul, vulgar language. None of this was necessary to critique the sexualization of children.
The Netflix film Cuties is an all too common example of a movement within society right now that appears determined to sexualize young children, and it's a growing and worrying trend for all parents. Now, you would think that the one place that children, especially very young children, would be safe from exposure to inappropriate material would be in school. Now, as of September 2020, England introduced new regulations and new teaching requirements for all schools to include what is called Relationships Education, or RE for primary schools, and Relationships and Sexuality Education, known as RSE, for secondary schools. And Wales is to follow suit in 2021. The new legislation requires all children from 4 to 16 years old to be taught about sex and relationships, removing parental opt-outs. But what exactly are these programs and what is being taught? Well, some teachers, parents and experts are still divided about how sex and relationships should be taught to children. Some believe there should be no sex education before the age of 12, and that teaching young children, particularly about sexuality, may confuse them at that age. This is a typical letter currently being sent to parents across Wales in regard to this programme in both primary and secondary schools. The letter explains how schools must now present relationships and sexuality education. The Department of Education has announced changes to relationships and sexuality education, which came into effect in September 2020. Well, this isn't technically true, as this relates to the rollout in England, as relationship and sexuality education isn't being implemented in Wales until 2021, but all Welsh schools will be required to comply with the new requirements from next year. The letter goes on to describe the learning outcomes for the different school years, which includes being able to use correct terms for parts of the body, differentiate between male and female, and appropriate and inappropriate touching, personal safety, keeping mind and body safe and healthy, and the value of family and friends. It goes on to say that the purpose of this letter is to provide you with information about what will be introduced to the children. Please read the following information that we trust will inform and reassure you. Well, that sounds reasonable enough, but the issue is that many schools, local authorities, and more importantly, parents don't know exactly what's going to be taught. So there's a lot of ignorance and guesswork as to the content of what it will look like. Now, unfortunately, the link in the letter for parents to gain further guidance takes you to the gov.uk Guidance for Parents document, which applies to England only, so it doesn't help inform or reassure Welsh parents at all. But the letter does include a link to ensuring access to the full curriculum, the Welsh Government Guideline document. The one thing that both documents have in common is that they are both quite vague, and they both state that there will not be a right to withdraw your child from RSE as part of the new curriculum. Now, the Welsh media has run several articles on this recently, such as this headline from Wales Online. In short, this is the Welsh Government's position on relationship and sexuality education, and current Welsh Minister for Education, Kirsty Williams, has said it's essential that all young people are provided with access to information that keeps them safe from harm. It is vital that we continue to work with communities across Wales to ensure parents have the right to develop, care for and guide their children into adulthood while allowing our schools to provide a broad and balanced education. Relationship and sexuality education lessons will always be appropriate to the age and to the developmental stage of the learner. Well, quite frankly, from what we've researched so far, that will be a world first. The guidance for parents on this program is very vague, but sounds very reasonable and acceptable. So why the fuss? After all, the Relationship and Sexuality Education rollout in the UK is sanctioned by the World Health Organization and based on a UNESCO framework document called International Guidelines on Sexuality Education. What could possibly be wrong with that? The issue is that the syllabus Kirsty Williams and the Welsh Government are describing does not resemble what RSE looks like in the rest of the UK or indeed the rest of the world. So we can only assume that the Welsh Government either endorses the type of content we are about to show you or is ignorant of what this programme delivers to children elsewhere in the UK. From the evidence we've seen, if the proposed Relationship and Sexuality Education programme for Welsh schools mirrors the content in England and Scotland and the rest of the world for that matter, it's not age appropriate, the information does not keep children safe from harm, and as far as consultation with parents is concerned, the vague letters to parents are already being issued, so it would appear that the decisions have already been made. As an example of what RE can look like for primary schools, Warwickshire County Council rolled out the All About Me programme across 241 primary schools as part of the government's Relationship and Sex Education programme. Children as young as 6 were being taught about touching or stimulating their own genitals, leaving parents very disturbed and upset about the highly inappropriate nature of what their children were being taught. All About Me classes involve pupils aged between 6 and 10, being told that there are rules about touching yourself, and an explanation of rules about self-stimulation appears in the scheme's Year 2 lesson plan for 6 and 7-year-olds. Under a section called Touching Myself, teachers are advised to tell children that lots of people like to tickle or stroke themselves as it might feel nice. They are also instructed to inform youngsters that this may include touching their private parts, and that while some people may say this behaviour is dirty, it is in fact very normal. However, the youngsters are warned it is not polite to touch themselves in public. It's an activity they should do when they're alone in the bath, shower, or in bed. In the same lesson, children are given scenarios which they must judge to be okay or not okay. In one scenario, pupils are told that when a girl called Autumn has a bath and is alone, she likes to touch herself between her legs. It feels nice. Is this what the Welsh Government has in mind as age appropriate for 6-year-olds? The problem here is that RSE guidance is far too vague. It's even more concerning that parents may be denied the opportunity to withdraw their children. To me, it looks like Warwickshire paid more attention to a controversial sex education consultancy than to what parents understand to be in the best interest of their children. And it's frightening to think that governments and local authorities all over the country are thinking they know better than parents and are doing the same. Okay, maybe the Warwickshire fiasco is an isolated case. Let's try and get some balance here. What does RSE look like in the rest of the world? Because bear in mind, RSE in this country originates with the UNESCO World Health Organization framework known globally as Comprehensive Sexual Education. CSE programs across both North and South America teach children as young as 8 how to put a condom on plastic genitalia, and the children are given handouts on how to negotiate sexual encounters with other students at 8 years of age. In another example, International Planned Parenthood had a UNESCO-sponsored campaign in Africa called Healthy, Happy and Hot, which was designed for HIV-positive youth. Shockingly, it tells pupils you have the right not to disclose your HIV status to a sexual partner if you're not comfortable doing so. And if you decide not to practice safe sex, that's your decision entirely. So it seems it's healthy, happy and hot, but not safe. Here's the World Health Organization framework document for policymakers called Standards for Sexuality Education in Europe. And this document suggests that children have sexual rights from birth, and children from 0 to 4 should be given information on masturbation and the right to explore gender identities. So here's a selection of government-endorsed sex ed resources currently being used in Scotland and England.
Hey you, my name is Thomas Tom Scott Ridgell, and pornography is as fun to watch as it is hard to forget. So much flesh. Pornography, or porn, is defined as images or video of people doing sexy sex things while missing some or all of their clothes. by me. Just now. With a huge percentage of young folk enjoying porn on a regular basis, I think it's time you and I had a little chat, so I've teamed up with Childline to tell you everything I think you need to know about porn in as little time as possible. You ready for this? Part 1! What is this stuff? The whole purpose of pornography is to arouse us, to get us sexually excited, and that's great because using your actual imagination is hard work. I mean, have you seen my YouTube videos? They are awful. Porn is great to watch while we're getting intimate with ourselves because it doesn't just turn us on, it also distracts us from how stupid we look while we're doing it, which is always good. Despite porn being a vague term used to describe sexually explicit viewing material, if you want to see more than straight white people getting it on, you might have to be a little more specific. There are plenty of types of porn, including but not limited to softcore, hardcore, lesbian, thespian, interracial, facial, alternative, conservative, hentai, far cry, BDSM, NEDM, amateur, mature, and swan disco.
So apart from the inappropriate title, WTF is porn, this video treats the subject as a joke and is unashamed promotion of every conceivable type of pornography to children under the age of consent. The message seems to be, just go for it, have fun, because if the internet has taught us anything, it is that if it exists, there is porn of it. And what's the first thing children are going to do on hearing this message, apart from head straight to the internet? Talking of pornography on the net, here's a BBC article about a young man who was shocked that his 13-year-old sister was given homework on pornography. As the internet is where most kids do research for homework, it's absolutely no surprise that his sister headed straight to Google. Perhaps Tomska would approve. But well done to her big brother. He appears to have more sense and common decency than any of our politicians put together. In fairness, the school principal stressed that the assignment didn't require internet research as the answers were in the material the pupils were given. Maybe the school principal hadn't seen the Tomska video, so that's okay then. A spokesman for the Department of Education said it was a matter for the school and they had no further comment to make, so they dodged that bullet. Here's an article from the Times. Schools are being encouraged to teach children as young as 13 about intimate sexual acts using a dice game. The government has funded a toolkit which includes dice featuring words such as anus, vulva, penis and hands and fingers, and children are encouraged to throw the dice twice and talk about the sexual acts that can happen using the two body parts. It's no surprise that between 2016 and 2018, over 600 rapes were reported on school premises. The incidence of sexual assault is in the thousands. Now, common sense would suggest that this isn't going to help that situation. Meanwhile, coming soon to a school near you.
Porn star penises are 6 to 9 inches. Civilian penis? 5 to 7. And while porn stars have very little hair down there, in real life 65% of women and 85% of men do. Male performers can hump for days, but in real life 75% of men ejaculate within 3 minutes. Unlike porn stars, only 11.5% of women have had a same-sex experience. And only 40% of women have tried anal. Just 22% say they'll take a hot load in the face. And only 30% will actually swallow said load. The portion of women who've been in a threesome is less than 20%. And while the internet is awash in female squirters, only 6% of women say they regularly gush forth. Finally, what about light bondage? Well, only 40% have tried it. Wait, that's actually quite a lot. So there you go.
Once upon a time, in January 1966, my dad shook my mum like a rabbit. 1 month later, she realized that she'd become pregnant with me. A few decades later, a rabbit shook me like a rabbit. 1 month later, I realized that I'd become pregnant. As is clear in the expression, rabbits are keen lovers. They do not have mating seasons unlike other mammals, simply because they never stop shagging. Their ovulation takes place whenever copulation occurs, even when a female is pregnant. Hence, they enjoy near 100% pregnancy rate. The best analogy can be made to a vending machine. A penis is inserted into the slot. And it is guaranteed that in 28 days, 7 baby rabbits will be dispensed. Now, both my mum and I are pregnant. We went to a hospital. My mum had a scan first. It's me. And this is my turn. It's a bit of shock to see septic split, though I should have expected this as a result of sexual intercourse with a rabbit. But can I afford to bring up 7 children? The answer was clear. So I interviewed the fetal rabbits one by one. I told them that I'm a poor artist, and their father is missing, and I don't even remember his face. And in the UK, there's no additional financial support for families with multiples. I can really just afford one. They understood the situation, and after a long discussion among them, all of them moved to a surrogate mother rabbit's womb except one that remained as my baby. In the meantime, my mum and I were talking about easy, painless labor. But as usual, the reality was slightly different. The doctor said the vagina had been sewn up from inside, and the baby got tied up with umbilical cord. Then he found another figure in the room. It turned out to be my son, who took the baby hostage.
Words fail me. Apart from having zero educational value, for any age group, before you laugh, it's your taxes that are going to be paying for this.
Switching gears now. A new study found that half of transgender male adolescents have attempted suicide. It's an alarming statistic that is more than triple the attempted suicide rate among teens who are not transgender.
As another example of materials being used in primary schools, My Princess Boy teaches that a very young child can choose whatever gender they wish. Now, regardless of your opinion on this, the hard fact is that this kind of literature has created a mental health issue in young children. Gender identity has been taught in schools since the introduction of the Equality Act in 2009. And the result has been that child referrals to the Gender Identity Development Service have risen by more than 2,300% due to the use of this kind of material. Now, given that the suicide rate amongst transitioning and transgender people has topped the 50% mark, particularly amongst males, this amounts to a mental health crisis amongst young children of immense proportions. And quite frankly, the promotion of transgender literature to young children in this way in school is tantamount to state-sponsored child abuse, given the known potential risk of suicide. So, given the statistics regarding the promotion of gender choice to young children, if this is the type of RSE content proposed for Welsh school children, I'd like to ask Kirsty Williams how this material keeps children safe from harm. We've just skimmed the surface of the materials now being used right now in Britain's schools. It's no wonder that people find it hard to believe that these are actually government and charity sponsored and approved materials. But don't go anywhere just yet. It gets a whole lot worse. The root of the problem lies with UNESCO, the World Health Organization, and non-government organizations that have massively influenced the framework for sex education globally. Section 9 of the Education Act 1996 says parents are the primary educators of children, and schools should listen to parents as to how they want their kids to be educated. This new framework is in direct contradiction to the law and the human rights of the parents. The problem is that the UNESCO WHO framework puts children in a position where their sexual rights from birth are superior to the human rights of the parent. Let's be very clear. This is a Welsh Government directive, and sadly our teachers will have no choice. They're going to be obligated to follow the framework with the message that they have a duty to validate every sexual practice. It beggars belief. There are some statutory requirements that must be adhered to for RSE, which in short means that the material must be age appropriate, the school must have a written policy, and must consult with the parent and the school must provide a written copy and examples of the materials being taught. I would strongly suggest that all parents in Wales seek examples of the materials being taught as a matter of urgency. Now, if like me you're shaking your head in disbelief at this point, why has all this sudden change in the delivery of sex education come about? The World Health Organization and UNESCO are rolling these programs out worldwide in partnership with organizations such as Planned Parenthood and the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, or SIECUS, and also the Kinsey Institute. The big question is, who are they and what are these organizations recommending to the World Health Organization and UNESCO? The 2005 feature film Kinsey, starring Liam Neeson in the title role, is a portrait of researcher Dr. Alfred Kinsey. Classed as a comedy drama, the film describes Kinsey as a scientist driven to uncover the most private secrets of a nation. Using the technique of his own famous sex interviews, Kinsey recounts the scientist's extraordinary journey from obscurity to global fame. This comedy drama is essentially a light-hearted romp with a dark side. But in contrast, the 1998 Yorkshire television production for Channel 4 in the Secret History series called Kinsey's Paedophiles tells a true version of events. Dr. Alfred Kinsey was considered the world's leading authority on sexuality, and his 1948 book Sexual Behaviour in the Human Male sparked the sexual revolution. But the truth is, Kinsey believed that children are sexual from birth and should have the same sexual rights as adults. Now, where have I heard that before? Now, in reality, Kinsey was a paedophile, yet regardless of this fact, he is still revered and honoured by sexual rights activists as a hero and the founder of their movement. He advised governments around the world in the 1950s, and much of today's sexuality education programs that promote sexual pleasure as a right for children are rooted in Kinsey's sex research, which in part was based on the documented sexual abuse of children by paedophiles. So just how did Kinsey have such a tremendous impact on the development of the sexual education system? Kinsey, a Harvard graduate, received funding from the Rockefeller Foundation and Playboy magazine to conduct sex research at the University of Indiana. The Kinsey Institute for Research in Sex, Gender and Reproduction is still active today, still promoting Kinsey's fraudulent research. The main tool Kinsey used in his research was a questionnaire with 350 probing questions designed to uncover the most intimate details of the sexual activity of thousands of people he questioned. Now, unlike the movie, the volunteers he enlisted to answer these questions weren't ordinary people, but included convicted rapists, murderers, prostitutes, and paedophiles. To support his claim that children are sexual from birth, Kinsey used data from paedophiles who documented their sexual abuse of children to prove that even infants could be sexually aroused. The tables these paedophiles used to document the sexual arousal rates of young children, using a stopwatch to time how quickly babies and young children reached orgasm, were published in Chapter 5 of his book, which is still available today. The tables show children being raped around the clock in some of the data tables published. This was nothing short of torture. In addition, Kinsey's colleague Wardle Pomeroy admitted using data they received from the infamous Rex King, who raped at least 800 infants and children, some as young as 2 months old, before he was caught by police. Kinsey was still collecting data from King 10 years after Kinsey knew he was abusing children and instructed King on how to record details of his sexual acts as data he could use. He also paid fathers who were sexually abusing their own children for data. In the early 1950s, a murder trial in Germany linked Kinsey to a Nazi paedophile, Dr. Fritz von Balasek, who raped hundreds of children during World War II. After the war, von Balasek, a former senior Nazi party official and commander of a ghetto of a town in occupied Poland, was arrested and put on trial for the murder of one of his rape victims, a 10-year-old girl. The murder investigation revealed a large amount of correspondence between Balasek and Kinsey. Balasek had written to Kinsey offering him his case history and his diaries, recording years of sexually abusing and raping children, which were sent to Indiana. Kinsey warned Balasek in his letters to be careful, but encouraged him to continue with his research with his child victims. Both Interpol and the FBI pressured Kinsey to release the diaries as evidence in the murder case, but he refused point blank and responded with the fact that he would sooner destroy the diaries from von Balasek than release them to Interpol. Von Balasek was acquitted of the murder of the young girl, but was found guilty of rape and sexual assault of more than 30 children. During the trial of Balasek, presiding Judge Berger said, "This is no longer human. What was all this for? I got the impression that you got to the children in order to impress Kinsey and to deliver him material." And to the judge's shock, Balasek replied, "Kinsey himself asked me for that." It's obvious that von Balasek took instruction from Kinsey on how to record his abuse of the children as data. The German press called von Balasek the worst sex criminal since the end of World War II. German papers had the Kinsey-Balasek collaboration across the front pages of every German newspaper. The American press was completely silent. Kinsey's research eventually became the structure that fed itself into what we are teaching our children right now. Kinsey's fingerprints are on everything that deals with sexuality education today. Next to Planned Parenthood, one of the largest producers of sex education curricula in America is the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, SIECUS. SIECUS was launched with support from the Kinsey Institute and seed money from Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy magazine, who was a huge advocate for Kinsey. SIECUS is heavily involved in policy battles over sexual rights in the United States, and a SIECUS employee was the main author of the United Nations International Guidelines on Sexuality Education. SIECUS employees regularly attend United Nations conferences where they promote dangerous sexual ideologies to be included in provisions in United Nations documents. Co-founder of SIECUS and co-author of the original Kinsey reports, Wardell Pomeroy, and a number of founders of SIECUS during its early history, were so radical that they argued publicly for the relaxing the taboos against adult child sexuality and even incest. This was documented in a Time magazine article in 1980 called "Attacking the Last Taboo," in which Pomeroy, vice president of SIECUS's board of directors, stated, "It's time to admit that incest need not be a perversion or a symptom of mental illness." Pomeroy continued, "Incest between children and adults can sometimes be beneficial." Who for? While there is no evidence that indicates SIECUS currently promotes paedophilia or incest, there is plenty of evidence showing that they promote graphic sexuality education for children, which includes the right to sexual pleasure from birth and instruction in high-risk sexual practices. Why? Because Alfred Kinsey is held up as the father and hero of sexual freedom. But despite Kinsey's corrupt and fraudulent research, it influenced and still influences sex education globally. These groups portray themselves as guardians of our children's health and claim to provide students with all the information and skills they need to make smart choices. But it's crystal clear for anyone with an ounce of common sense that the opposite is true. On April 23, 2014, the Kinsey Institute was granted consultative status by the United Nations Committee on Non-Governmental Organizations of the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC. The Kinsey Institute is officially part of the Central Forum for discussing economic and social issues and for forming policy recommendations with regard to sexuality education worldwide. The Kinsey Institute's worldview has been influencing United Nations policy for some time through SIECUS, which helped UNESCO develop comprehensive global sex education guidelines promoting masturbation from birth to 5 years old as part of infants' own specific sexuality. I hope by now you're asking yourself, what can we do to stop this? The Schoolgate Campaign website, schoolgatecampaign.org, is an amazing resource and contains a huge amount of helpful information for concerned parents. There's also an excellent ebook, Relationships and Sex Education, What Parents Need to Know, which is a fantastic resource and free to download. Public Child Protection Wales can be found on Facebook and their website, publicchildprotectionwales.org. They are passionately fighting to stop the rollout of RSE in its current form in Wales, and they need your support to force the Welsh Government into a serious conversation with Welsh parents. Please sign the petition. They're fighting hard to protect your children, but they can't do it alone. Responsible and appropriate sex education can not only help prevent disease, addiction to pornography, and unwanted pregnancy, but develops young minds to make smart choices and good decisions for their physical, mental and emotional well-being. This isn't responsible and appropriate sex education. This is child sexualization driven by sexual rights pressure groups and government bodies who believe they know better than parents what is best for their child, which takes away your rights as a parent. The people of Wales have a real opportunity to stop this legislation in its tracks before it's written into law. And if that happens, it would be the first country in the world to do so. This is beyond political colour, beyond your nationality, beyond the faith you may follow, whether you're a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, a Buddhist, a Hindu, a Sikh, or of no faith at all. It doesn't matter, but our children do. The protection of our children is a banner we can all unite behind. Now, make no mistake, time's very short and the Welsh Government have the pen poised ready to sign this into law. So I hope this motivates you to find out more. Even if it's to prove me wrong, please do the research, because once you realise the information we've shared with you here is true, I hope it motivates you to get involved, to raise awareness, to protest, to shake our politicians awake, because this is a threat that could affect a whole generation of Welsh kids, and it's time to make your voice heard against the sexualisation and corruption of our children in Wales. Please sign the petition, and please share this video with as many people as you possibly can, and join the fight to protect the children of Wales.